Our panelists, there are three of them, to come up here now so we can start the discussion period. I think after this morning, remember the old joke about death and taxes? It sounds like it's going to be natural gas and regulation. More of the same. I'm going to move up to the side. And if you would, introduce yourselves to the room. Tell them who you're with and what you do. No, it's fine. What we're going to do, I'm going to leave it up to the floor on how you want to do this. The topics are the best practices, supply and demand, risk, technology, fuel mix, and environmental considerations. Would you like to take a particular category and talk about it, or would you like to just leave the floor open?
Hopefully people have questions.
The questions.
If not, you don't want me to sing. I don't know, Lopa might be able to sing better. I will clear a room as fast as possible.
Any of those questions are fine. I have operations experience and
Yeah. I was having a discussion this morning at the breakfast table with Tim, where are you? And we were talking about the length of time now that's occurring between periodic maintenance issues and all of the IT technology that's going into the power plants. He was literally sitting at the breakfast table with his phone, checking the operation of a lot of the plants. That's some pretty amazing stuff. That's worth discussing. Why don't we leave the floor open to questions?
Or give us a topic. This would be like the Tonight Show. Remember John? I'll give you one. Somebody can pick out a tune, a topic.
I'm Julie Turner with Duke Energy. I'm in a region where we're almost split in operations between coal and gas. It's a regulated utility. Therefore, we have to dispatch the most economic fuel source. And last year we got in a situation where coal and gas prices were overlapping quite a bit. So, depending on the day, you might be in gas, you might be in coal. And I saw the forecast of gas prices being cheaper, which I like a lot since I operate gas plants. But, do you foresee us getting into those situations where we will have that overlap? It's almost like the worst situation you can be in. Because one of the previous speakers talked about how the capacity factors may decline for coal plants. And you can't really guarantee that if your coal prices are on par with gas.
I think I might be able to answer that somewhat. In ERCOT, you have a lot of that same situation where gas prices are such that is below the overall coal market. In fact, they've gotten into a situation where they're backing down or bringing off coal units and operating either renewables or gas to supply the market. So it can change on a daily basis, and it's put a lot of pressure on coal as a result of that. But it's coming. It's just a matter of with the renewables and the gas prices, it's going to put more pressure on coal. I don't know that answers your question. But get ready to cycle a lot, and when you do, it's going to, as the prices of gas goes down, the more capacity that you're going to have to bring online.
Just to put a twist on that, I always said you don't let me near the operations floor of the treasury of the companies for a reason. I would mess both of them up, but you're going to put the policy and regulatory overlay that you mentioned, we're not going to escape that taxes, regulations, and natural gas. Your job's going to get tougher, I think, under the Clean Power Plan. And that's not a criticism of the plan, it's just inherent in what they're proposing to tackle the problem I think needs to be addressed. As was mentioned, I've heard of our members talking about cycling coal plants seasonally. You're also going to get the problem of, under the plan, while the building block 2 is the largest building block at 70% of the CCGTs, that's certainly left to the states. States can choose other building blocks or get to their targets outside the building blocks. But as you heard from some of the prior speakers, the modeling all assume that most of the reductions that turned led to the individual state targets were based on 70% gas. So what else would you do if not that? And what's left to the states that will complicate not only your life from a coal standpoint, but for gas folks, is that they left it to the states to determine how they're going to get to the 70% factor. So one of the two options, there are really two options, some variations on them. One is to put one-time limits on the coal plants. So then the question becomes, well, assuming you can even model that, you're going to have to, who gets to decide? So let's say hypothetically your one-time limit is whatever it is, X hours a year, and you're in January, maybe the economic decision from economic dispatch, as you say, in a given day is coal or gas, or it switches day to day. The further complication is going to be, even if you're in a non-RTO, where you've got more direct control over what you do, you're going to have to figure out when you're going to use up your runtime limits. And some lawyers have even speculated about, well, then does that bump up against legal liability in terms of allegations of market manipulation? So there's a lot of these details that have to be worked out. The other way to go under the Clean Power Plan would be for the state to put a price on carbon and have some shadow price that would be reflected either in the bids that the RTO would administer, or if you're not in an RTO, in the calculations you would use in your own economic dispatch model. That then assumes, or who gets to decide what the shadow price is. And imagine trying to do this over a multi-state region. So again, I know it's tough already, but what's coming down the road under the Clean Power Plan would likely make that even more complicated, unless you had multi-state plans and multi-state coordination, which even if you could get there, critics have said there isn't enough time under the current timelines for that to happen. So sorry to be the bearer of complicating news, but I think that's the reality we're facing.
And just to kind of add on to that, in a single utility that operates in multiple states like Duke, you're going to have the additional complication of having different states that you operating and potentially having different rules that they come up with and different processes under the Clean Power Plan. So that's going to complicate how you do economic dispatch if you dispatch for your whole region, as I know some multi-state utilities do. So that'll just be another complicating factor as to how these work out, and you might have to do it on a state-by-state basis, just based on the generation within that state, based on the plans that come up within each individual state.
I'm Sherman Masiga. In listening to this and wondering how the RTOs in areas of the country that haven't responded to this, the bigger question is, why did the EPA go down the path of trying to mandate dispatch as opposed to a CO2 allowance system instead? What drove the thinking to go down the path they have with all its complexity versus something simpler?
I can't.
Divide and conquer.
In the agency's defense, I could say that when I was a relatively junior staffer at the time, climate was on the very periphery of the discussion in 1990. There were some people saying, gosh, there's this thing called climate change, global warming. Should we be concerned about CO2? Remember, the 1990 amendments were, in the words of former Chairman Dingell, passed the House by a large margin in a day in the final version, but it was literally years, almost a decade in the making. So the issues that drove the 1990 amendments really were all about acid rain and particulates and SOx and NOx and so forth. And so by the time the 90 Act was passed, it really was largely looking at issues that had bubbled up throughout the 80s. So there's always this time lag in politics and in the policy process. So the Clean Air Act amendments of 1980 were not designed directly with CO2 in mind at all. So everyone remembers the infamous Waxman-Markey legislation in the House in 2009, and at one point Senator Lieberman and Senator McCain, there was a lot of cap-and-trade bills, in the Congress. The problem the agency faced is the president wants to address CO2, but any point of view, it needs to be addressed. I personally think it needs to be addressed. So what they were left with, in the absence of clear authority to engage in cap-and-trade, which would be the best economic answer, certainly, they don't have that authority. At least they don't think they do. They probably don't. So they literally kind of went through the Clean Air Act and said, okay, well, Section 101, that's not going to work. 102, not going to work. 3. And 111 was sort of this residual authority to say in 1990, well, we don't know all there is to know. Secretary Rumsfeld's old, known knowns, known unknowns, and treacherous unknown unknowns. So we're going to put this provision in the Act. It's sort of a catch-all default provision that anticipates that we don't know in 1990 every sort of air pollution issue that might come up. So 111 was really this idea that said, well, for everything that's not otherwise regulated. Now the debate before the courts is, and I can tell you, we literally, this should make you all shudder at how public policy gets done. We literally would write this until 4 in the morning, shower, go home, shower, come back at 6 and keep working. And there were nights that last couple of weeks where literally people were, sleep deprived, which is not a good state to be in. And 2 versions of 111D actually got enacted into law. Literally, 2 versions that were never reconciled between the House and the Senate. And that's why there'll be this, law school dream, law professor dream. So it's a long-winded way of saying there's imperfect options for them. So that's why they seized on 111D as David, which is for existing sources, that had this idea of a best system of emissions. And so they're sort of stuck with the stricture of that provision. And while they'll say it has a lot of flexibility, that's yet to be tested how much more flexibility they think they can introduce and survive the legal challenges. But I think if they had their druthers, they would do cap-and-trade if they could.
Bob Brown, Kiewit Power. It seems to me we talked about nuclear, I forget who it was, being either 90% or 0 capacity factor. Won't that apply to coal at some point? And have you talked to my friend at Duke? But so much of the coal plant's operation is fixed, not variable with capacity factor. So it seems that at some point we're not going to ever run a coal plant at low capacity factor, especially if it's faced with capital improvements for NOx, SOx, whatever, PM. So won't we see a lot of binary choices of just mothball a plant versus run at low capacity factor?
Yeah, a lot of decisions that have to be made, especially the supercritical. You can only bring it down to a certain load anyway, and then you're also impacted by the environmental conditions at those loads. So what a lot of companies have to make a decision on is, do I take this supercritical asset offline, knowing that it's going to take me maybe 1 or 2 days to get it back online, as compared to just leaving it on, take the hit on the market, and ride through it. So, that's from a cycling standpoint of natural gas. Yes, you're going to be up and down, but you may not even get on due to the fact that they'll just ride through the market based on those conditions that you just referred to.
And my first experience really with gas, the type turbine was I think it was a garbage burner up in New Jersey. This is a number of years ago. And my experience and background had primarily been coal-fired power plants. We were just shooting the breeze, and I was asking him about downtime and everything. He turned to me and he said, I can start making electricity in 90 minutes. And I thought to myself, it takes about a day and a half or more to get a coal boiler. So I guess what? They're going to put a big simmer switch on. that can't possibly help the consumer. The cost of the coal, the operation of the plant, and everything else has got to be built into the rate equation.
Yeah, as the gas market, like Pete was talking this morning, where you don't see the high flexibilities in prices, up to the $8, $10, $16, and it maintains around that $4 to $5. As long as the strategists have an idea within a small band, they'll bring those coal units on a month at a time, knowing a pretty stable gas market that they can keep, pretty flat. When it was varying, $4 or $5 up and down, it was a lot better from an economics or strategy to just keep the coal units on. So as that gas market stabilizes and has a more flat curve and can be predicted, then they'll take those coal units offline over a longer period of time.
And then the question, of course, becomes depending on market structure and how do you get paid?
Yeah.
If you're here in Illinois and you're Dynegy, you've got thousands of megawatts of coal in southern Illinois, and you're in MISO, that's a different economic equation. Obviously, that's one of the questions that goes to what I was saying earlier about the two agencies not necessarily talking to each other, or at least maybe physically talking to each other but not understanding each other. And that's something that we keep pushing, because you just can't assume, as you know, that the plants are going to stay going if they're not economic. And that's the challenge that some of the nuclear folks are facing. And Lopa and I work a lot on this together with our colleagues, and it's really something that should be more front of mind with policymakers, because we saw last winter in the polar vortex what happens when you have plants that are in need of additional investment. And it's no coincidence that a lot of the plants on the coal side, I remember, it was coal and gas had problems during the polar vortex. But the coal plants, certainly those that were nearing retirement, understandably, weren't being invested in. And so I think there's just this assumption that the plants are going to somehow miraculously do things they weren't originally designed to do. And aside from the physical limitations, there's a whole question of whether or not financially you can be compensated. It's like you can shut them down for 3 months and then come back on. So what the nuclear folks have faced here in Illinois, particularly, is the wind from the west, and this is true in Texas. Those in Texas, drives the power prices negative. So you're actually absorbing negative prices because of the impact of the renewables that are being paid outside of the market. So it's sort of a choice that I don't fully realize we're at a crossroads where if we're going to have markets and market forces, then we have to let them work. If you're going to have some people in the market, some people out, that's not going to work, and we're going to go back to a regulated or contract model, which is sort of, quote, okay, depending on your point of view, but that hanging in the middle isn't going to be very sustainable for a whole lot of reasons, and this is a good example of it. It just won't be financially sustainable. You're not getting paid enough you're getting paid on volume. You're being told to sit around and wait. We're going to need you later, or we're going to need you in the peak period, but not in shoulder months or not at other times of the year. And your compensation is still geared to volume. That's obviously a recipe for disaster.
There's going to have to be a capacity market at some point. And we'll use Texas as an example here. 12,000, 13,000 megawatts of wind out of 65 to 70,000 megawatts in the state. You have a situation where all that wind can stop instantaneously, and it has on occasion. And you have a situation where in the past, when it was regulated, they had to spend in reserve to cover that type of loss of a particular unit. Now they don't, so either you're on or you're off, and you're at 100%. So you're in a situation where you can go into emergency conditions in ERCOT a lot more often than you have in the past, basically, in regulation.
The word that comes to mind is dispatch. And in keeping with those comments, turning to supply and demand, I can remember, I'm an economist by training myself. I can remember sitting with utility executives in and outside of the general electric company, and we would be talking about planning their future growth and what their needs were going to be. And they would say things like, I know every 2 years I need to add 150 megawatts. So in 7 years, I need a new plant, and it takes X number of months to build a new plant, so we need to get started next January. I'd like to hear some comments from you folks about the current demand for electricity, the growth rate of it in the country relative to some of these questions. Because what this all comes down to, and this is my background in education showing, is investment. And there has to be a return. And you have to be able to express the rate of return. That's what makes shareholders happy. That's what pays dividends and everything else. So within your organizations and the panel's organizations, how does everybody feel these days about what the growth rate in electricity demand is in the country? Anybody?
I think it depends on the region and the economy itself. I know with the gas drilling and a lot going on there, it impacted the markets like the Barnett Shale around the DFW area. And in those co-ops that in the outlying areas were growing at 6% a year, where the major utilities may be growing at 2 to 3% a year. So it depends on where the need is relative to the economics in that particular area.
But by the way, the growth of electricity demand in this country was tied to GNP since day one. Last year, it decoupled from GNP. That's the first time that's happened, to my knowledge, in history. So maybe the power plants get built where the consumption is the heaviest.
Well, you have a lot of petrochemical being installed now as a result of the natural gas prices, and the industry is, you can't get craft labor almost anymore along the Gulf Coast because there's so much construction going on. That is usage that's increasing the overall load in that particular region. The energy market as a whole is having more of an impact on energy usage in Texas and in that part of the country more than places.
Yeah, I have a slide in my presentation which shows that electric usage has increased nationally by about 35% since about 1990. And at that same period of time, the GDP has increased about 76%. And so there has been that decoupling that was just mentioned. And a lot of it is due to more efficient technology, distributed generation, increased use of demand response and energy efficiency, and other types of resources that have just kind of made that. But electric use overall has increased on the past few years.
Yeah, and looking forward, the last couple of reports I've seen, instead of basing it on the linkage with economic growth, which, as you said, was almost lockstep. Right? I've seen charts that show through the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, almost exactly in lockstep with maybe your chart with GDP, and then it kind of broke off for a while. It was like 3/4 of GDP, and then it was half. Now people are pegging, as you said, pockets of growth in Texas and the Gulf Coast and places like Ohio, but overall. And I've been doing this 10 years on this job, and we used to hear forecast 2%, 3%, then 1%. Now it's below 1%. I think EIA is saying like 0.8%. Instead of tracking GDP, it's basically tracking population growth. Again, nationally, so there are 3 pockets of demand growth. But of course, even without demand growth overall, there's still going to be a lot of activity with retirements occurring. So we know that, you can read various numbers, but substantial amount of coal retirements at PJM, for instance, and so it's no coincidence that in the upcoming auction, which has been delayed, but will be held in July or August, there's somewhere between 6 and 10 gigawatts of new gas being built at PJM. Again, not coincidentally, largely in Ohio, excuse me, because of the coal plant retirements in Ohio. At the same time, the industrial base is expanding. And in fact, we've got now the Utica Shale to access. So there are pockets of demand replacement, but overall growth, I would say, this is one of the things we've made in our comments to FERC is the existing regulatory system and compensation scheme was based on volume. And the distribution utilities were the first to see how that could be problematic. And so you had literally decoupling at the distribution level for utilities. That concern, argument, and response hasn't yet filtered through to the power generation side. And what folks like the analysis group, CTRD, and the Bloomberg folks have pointed out is overall demand is probably about flat. But the composition of that demand, hour to hour, day to day, week to week, and so forth, is dramatically changing. So we sort of like looking at the lake, on a clear day, and not realizing that underneath the surface a lot's happening. So you're going to get peakier, you're going to get spikier, peakier demand spikes. It just goes back to sort of this common theme we've been talking about is plants that were either not physically designed or were based on economics that weren't tied to volume suddenly will be, because we're not going to be building into a growing market, which is a lot easier. We're going to be building into a market that's probably flat. People have more choices to go off the system, but not entirely off the system. And you might say, well, okay, fine, hurry up and do something. Well, as we've found in the efforts we've been undertaking at Parikh and elsewhere, there are trade-offs. So if you suddenly wanted to have a capacity market in Texas, which some of our members would eagerly like, as you know, it was a pretty hot political debate in Texas because suddenly the load side was not happy. Even when you try to explain that you always pay for capacity, it's just a question of it's transparent, you have choices. But here in Illinois, the capacity auction in the southern part of the state cleared at a very high price. Big political reaction against it. We went through the same thing when price caps came off. In eastern markets, after 10 years of restructuring, where to get the legislation through, it was easy to say back, in the 90s, we'll have a flat rate for 10 years. Well, guess what? 10 years passes. Who's around to deal with the mess? So there's just always this political reaction that makes it harder to adjust to these realities in the marketplace. But we're going to have to adjust somehow because the way the plants are operating and the fact that demand growth is flat to zero, it's just a reality. It's an external reality we have to deal with it. Politicians and policymakers are slow to either recognize it, or if they recognize it, slow to come up with ways to address it. Well, that's why we keep urging them to do so, because we don't know the adverse consequences people take. I think for granted that we have this incredibly reliable, affordable system, and we can't take it for granted. We never could, and we certainly can't for the next 5 to 10 years with everything that's going on.
I think a lot of it has to do with the particular area of the country you're in and how much the total load cycles from day to night or from season to season. And, that's why in some of the deregulated markets you're bidding into a 15-minute increments. That's why you're seeing these new CTs that can start up in 10 minutes. And so they can take advantage of the particular marketplace. If they have a bust in price in that 15-minute increments, they can get online and make as much money as they possibly can.
Yeah, so that means a new model.
Yes.
Yeah, totally new model. Let's talk a little bit about technological advances in the power plants and what we're able to do with that in terms of not only operating the power plant, but also dispatching the power, making it in Texas and selling it in Connecticut or whatever, that kind of thing. Is that an item or a topic of discussion best served by the panel, or is that information resonant in the audience here this morning? Are you at liberty to talk about technological advances in the utilities? I guess not.
I have a question on energy storage. I don't have the knowledge, but someone mentioned Tesla. That's going to have to play in this mix. I don't know how you make money on a giant battery farm in Texas chasing the wind. It seems like at some point that's going to happen.
Well, there's a lawsuit, or basically it's before the PUC, where the major transmission company is wanting to put battery storage to support the transmission constraints and/or capacity in a particular region. And the main struggle in that discussion is that a generation asset or is that a transmission asset? And how do we pay for it? And so you get into the battle, the generators, hey, that's the generator assets, and that's how we make our money and transmission. You know, you're paying for all your assets off the T cost and allocated. So, you know, we don't know how that's going to turn out, but what they're trying to do with such a widespread transmission system is resolve those load constraints that they have where generation is not being built. And so it's a major argument within the Public Utility Commission of Texas.
Yeah, we had a couple storage speakers at our annual meeting a couple weeks ago, and as was mentioned, Encore has this proposal in Texas. The Brown Group put out a study. Of course, Texas is probably the purest example of a restructured market. So, as you said, what is it? What is the battery transmission? Is it generation? The proposal, if I understand it right, from Encore would be to rate base storage and then sort of like lease it out somehow to generators and others to use. So our members were pretty concerned about it, to say the least, and I gather the Public Utility Commission of Texas is and would take legislative action in Texas. Some of our members always remind me we've had storage for a long time, obviously with pumped hydro. So in New England, one of our members, GDF Suez, has a large pumped hydro facility. There are other places in the country where that's an important part of the system. So obviously when people talk about storage, they're talking about something broader than that. I'm still learning more about Tesla. You know, they have these different power packs, and one's for the home and one's for the utility. They claim they've got all these orders. Then some of the analysts have started to dig in. I guess if you're a residential customer, you can, quote, order it, but not really pay for anything. So when they say they've got X tens of thousands of orders, I'm not quite sure what that means. They claim it's sort of like Apple. I think they're trying to create the Apple effect, that people are standing in line. So, gosh, if somebody's standing in line and buying that phone, I want to stand in line and buy that phone. I'm not trying to put it down. The conclusion I took from the presentations we had 2 weeks ago, it doesn't pencil out now. It could in the future, depending on what it is that the storage would provide. In California, they've had an RFP for proposals, and AES and other companies, not a member, but NRG, one of our members, is looking at storage. So the question is it storage at the home level, where in theory you could have rooftop solar and store it and then use it later in the day, or not? I've heard people even talk about, now I'm getting out of a limb, going if this is viable or not, but I've heard people in respective companies, at least blue sky, about, well, could you have seasonal storage? So sort of like an electric version of gas storage, where you would, produce electricity in the shoulder months and sell it in the summer. There are a lot of complexities around. There already are issues about if you're a rooftop solar homeowner, is that a retail transaction right now in California? You get the retail rate. So you as a homeowner in California, selling to the grid solar electrons, you're getting paid retail. The utility scale solar project in the desert that's producing the same electrons is getting paid wholesale. And then so what issues if you suddenly were to store the power at home and then sell it back to the grid? Do you have to get market-based rate authority from FERC? I mean, how would all this? So there's a lot of regulatory issues. But what I'm told is there are a lot of teams at Harvard and MIT and garages and places that build companies like Microsoft and Google that are really, really spending a lot of time and effort on this. And it's ultimately the battery technology. And it's probably the case that storage today, when we think of storage as in battery storage, is where solar and wind were. Everybody laughed when Jimmy Carter put the solar panels in the White House in the 1970s, and it cost some astronomical amount. I forgot who ripped them out, Ronald Reagan or somebody ripped the panels off. And, so fast forward to 2015, now it's obviously solar and wind costs have come down a lot. So it's probably a ways away. It's not going to change everything tomorrow, but it's not to be completely ignored. And what people think Elon Musk might be up to is he's both the head of Tesla, but also the head of Solar City. And the battery storage, if he can make it work, acts as a natural hedge to if he were to lose the benefit of the net metering. So instead of getting paid retail to induce people to put solar, they could buy the solar and then store it. So like I said, it's interesting how many thousands of orders they claim to have, and that over half the production, they're targeting, he's got this $5 billion gigafactory outside of Reno, Nevada. Strobe, California is crazy, but that's another story. Nevada won the bid, so there's this, I've been actually pictures, I've heard people who toured it. It's just ginormous. And they're dedicating, it's all the big batteries, and they're dedicating a third of the capacity of this $5 billion facility to make batteries for the power sector, both residential and utility scale. So if someone's willing to put that much money up to build that many batteries, they must think there's a market.
It's going to be a lot to do with the battery technology. Lithium, is very limited as far as a resource, so there may be a cap on how much you can actually do depending on the technology and the natural resource that you need to build that. Fluor, we build renewables, around the country, and we also operate and maintain, solar plants, and there's been a lot of discussion with our clients as to putting battery storage in to handle a lot of the issues, not only from a transmission perspective, but also from, handling, night requirements, in the state of California. And everybody's heard that California wants to get to 40, 50% renewables, and that creates a whole other range of problems in itself. So there's going to have to be some very innovative ways, and battery storage is one of those to support that.
Yeah, how close we really are to the breakthrough in storage technology really depends on who you talk to. There are some people who think it's right around the corner. And so if it is right around the corner, then that's, could potentially be a game changer in how we use renewables and other resources going forward. If it is not around the corner, then we still need to maintain our resource adequacy and reliability in the short term. But one of the things and that's an issue that we're really going to be discussing a lot at the EEI annual meeting, which is going to be in a couple weeks, is having Elon Musk come and talk about what he's doing, having other storage and battery developers talk about what they're thinking about is going to happen in the future. They're already providing ancillary services in the competitive markets in PJM, where they're able to bid in as a resource. And so they are, storage technology is definitely coming along and able to participate. And so where it goes from here, I think will be an interesting development and something that we're definitely thinking about as we think about the business model in the future for utilities.
And then the other question you have to ask yourself, what kind of environmental impacts does that environmental storage create in itself? And I don't think there's been a whole lot of study on that as of yet.
And the model that I kind of envision when I'm just speculating is where either the utility company or a company in between the utility and the consumer owns the battery, owns the panels on the roof, and everything. The customer produces the electricity on site through solar or through wind, uses what they use, stores, keeps their battery charged just like we do our cell phones. When the surplus is taken back up onto the grid, maybe that would divide everybody into a little more specialized. In other words, utilities would be responsible for generating electricity and maybe maintaining the lines. Then you'd have this equipment or technology company that would maintain whatever you needed, like the battery and the solar panels and so on and so forth. A lot of people I talk with, homeowners, they love the idea of having, their own generation and this and that and the other. But once they've owned a home, for example, for 10 years and the air conditioning unit goes out and one of the toilets stops working and everything, all they do is bitch and moan, excuse my French. I think it would be better if that equipment were leased to them, for example.
Yeah, I think a lot of the R&D is going to come out of companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, those big IT companies and communication companies that are trying to sell their image as renewables. In fact, they're buying renewable plants today, and they're also, I think, they will be forefront on the storage technology.
And then all you'd be asking the utility people to do is to generate electricity or move it around. And we all know how people feel in this country when they flip the light switch on and the lights don't come on.
Well, the other thing to watch too in this regard, and Lopa mentioned what's the business model of the future. So you have states like New York with this rather than reforming energy vision, proceeding where, I think first people were a little skeptical. It sounds a little out there, rather than reforming energy vision. But to the chair's credit, Audrey Zibelman and Governor Cuomo and others, and our members are still kind of working through this, it raises at least some provocative questions like, what, as you said, what is the role of the utility? So we went through the debate about whether or not you could have generation outside the utility, and people didn't think that would necessarily work, that it has, bumps and bruises and all. So now they're taking it to the next level and saying, well, if in addition to having an RTO type independent grid operator for the wholesale market that we have now in 2/3 of the country and actually growing, I mean, there's now a chance that the West, which was certainly anti-RTOs 10 years ago, is now actually making some pretty initially tentative steps and now bolder steps, expanding the RTOs in the West through the energy imbalance market. In New York, they're looking at maybe toying around with could the local distribution utility sort of be like an independent RTO. So their function would be as the platform, but you would have plug and play by everybody. So like you said, the Googles, I mean, there's an article today in the paper about, to your point about companies wanting to be green for image purposes, but also for their own values and the cost is lower. So you've got Walmart and Google and Target and all these other folks. So you're more likely, I think, at least personally, to see the batteries and the storage and distributed generation in the commercial and industrial sector. And to your point, most of the deals, at least as I understand it, in California, on the solar side, are lease deals. There are proposals to try to do sort of cooperative arrangements in communities and apartments. So again, it seems a little out there to change the distribution model. They're probably sounding a little out there when the debate was about RTOs and wholesale changes. And New York has volunteered itself to be the first, and they've made some tentative decisions. They have some really tough decisions coming up in the next phase as to how people would get paid and what the standards are. And should you allow the utility to be both the platform to compete with independent companies to provide the services, whether it's batteries or renewables or anything else. And a lot of it, too, is, we're talking about the economics, but a lot of it, at least in part of the country where we're from, is driven by resiliency issues of Superstorm Sandy and, Washington this last winter wasn't so bad, but last winter was. And I know what you mean, I had to put in a new furnace, and that's not cheap, and all the rest. So I think that's where, while it may not look attractive and pencil out on a purely economic basis today, some people are willing to spend the money if they have it for the added sort of peace of mind that they have additional self-generating capability. But right now, it's a relatively small part of the market, but if the economics get better, that could expand too.
There's a national defense issue, too, that's lurking behind all of this. We can't go to an economy that is solely dependent on people generating electricity on their rooftops. You can't run that risk. And it goes beyond the cyber attacks and everything on the grid. It has to do with being able positively and affirmatively generate electricity when you need it.
Well, actually, at one point, the Pentagon wanted to go to the power business. Can you imagine that? I mean, the Pentagon is your competition. But seriously, I mean, they're already in some places where they're doing solar facilities on military bases, and they were looking at, of course, raises issues for those of us that are in the market today to have the federal government essentially going into the power business. So in addition to self-generating for the base, on an emergency basis, they were looking to actually make it more of a permanent arrangement and partner with private sector folks to actually sell the excess power. That hasn't happened as much as the Pentagon touted a few years ago, but there's a whole effort underway there for the reasons that you mentioned.
One thing we're seeing out there from the standpoint of new generation, not much of it, is deployment of reciprocating engine plants. They've got better heat rate than combustion turbines. They can come up faster than combustion turbines. They've got a relatively flat heat rate because you package half a dozen of them together for whether it's 50 or 100 megawatts. One engine at full load is just a fraction, and you can get a better heat rate than back in a combustion turbine down the minimum bare permit will allow. So we're seeing quite a bit of that. What we're not seeing are people adding generation to cover load growth because by and large there isn't any. At least in the central time zone, where we're seeing outside of the Dakotas, possibly Texas. But there is a fair bit that's being added to cover retirements and regulating around the wind fleet.
Yeah, we've seen most of it replacement of coal at this point.
most of our clients are trying to hang on and do nothing until the clean power plan is decided.
Yeah, that's of course a little bit of a dangerous strategy because who knows when that might be. Even if they stick to the time frame they've announced, you're releasing in 2020. I think you heard the regional administrator sort of signal what others at EPA have signaled that 2020 clip is probably going away. And what they come out with this summer, and by the time it's litigated, and then even if it's litigated and implemented, we're well into past 2020 to get clear answers. And the question you would know better, the answer that I would is, then what? Do people really have enough? They may be logically waiting because they don't know yet. But by the time they get clear answers on the clean power plan from their states, is that enough time to really react to fill any gaps that
well, the answer is no, but the flip side of that question is how can a utility, whether it's a co-op, IOU, or any, spend money when there's a major question as to what the ultimate plan is going to look like. So as a minimum, I think we're on hold for the next 2 or 3 years. Before decisions are made, that won't be a stampede. Based on whatever's ultimately decided.
We measure aggregate data from all the investor-owned utilities to talk about what kind of capital expenditures they're making. And in my presentation, I have a slide which shows that over the past 10 years, the amount of investment that utilities have been making in generation, transmission, distribution, and gas-related infrastructure has been steady and increasing. And so despite the uncertainty in the regulatory arena, there's still a lot of investment being made in order to maintain the resiliency of the infrastructure.
Scott Ingram, I'm Director of Business Development for Zico. We may be just starting to scratch the surface of the question I'm about to ask, which is an apparent disconnect between the forecasted retirements of base-loaded coal assets and what we're seeing in the CCGT marketplace. As the second largest combustion engineering and manufacturing firm in the world, we see probably about 98% of the inquiries there are out there on the street, as you say, from Nutter Ericsson's and the Volts and all the major players. And given what you're speaking about, where we have base-loaded units that were built 40, 50, 60 years ago to satisfy the demand of a completely different market. We're looking at incredibly high capex to comply with regulatory concerns, to the operating costs, the efficiency differences. If I were an executive at a power company, I'd be looking at these assets going, geez, it's a major headache. But we're not seeing we're seeing an increase in inquiries from AEs, a lot of feed studies, things like that. Certainly better than it was, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago. But it's not keeping track with all I'm hearing about the relatively flat gas prices. Transmission seems to be one of the roadblocks, obviously. If you're not near an interstate line, then you've got to build that line. Where do you see that disconnect, and what's driving it?
Well, a lot of people think that, utilities want to close or shut down their coal units because of the environmental regulations and things of that nature. But there's a lot of other plays that go into that, relative to the markets and how you react to those markets. The 15-minute dispatcher market that I was talking about earlier, and how do you play into that? You want a technology that can get you there quicker, and you can cycle and have the more flexibility to do that. So you can operate the system and/or that particular plant in a mode to make the most money out of that asset. The problem, the reason that you haven't seen a lot, in Texas you've seen the gas market dictates the price. It always has, always will, probably until they run out, okay? But in the rest of the company, you have a lot of infrastructure that's not built, roads, pipelines, Transmission is pretty good, but the pipeline is the biggest issue. Yeah, the prices are low, but if you can't get the gas to the plant, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good. So, and the other thing, you get into a situation is you may, in certain parts of the country, only have one source that you're paying or buying that gas from. So you don't have a lot of competition associated with transportation costs and or the price of gas itself. So it's going to take, I think what you're seeing a lot is the infrastructure trying to catch up, and then when that infrastructure is in place where they can compete for gas among different suppliers and pipeline companies, then you'll start seeing a bigger growth in the actual construction of the generation assets. You know, when I was building power plants for, you know, as a client, it's always land, air, water, transmission, and gas, okay? And what I always try to do is get competition on the suppliers and multiple pipelines, and I owned a certain part of that pipeline so I could use it as compression storage, and as I cycle the plant up and down, then I could take a constant take on the scheduled gas at a lower price. So that's probably the biggest way for companies that are trying to manage their O&M cost of a particular gas plant is to make sure your fuel supply is right and you have the flexibility associated with that fuel supply.
So as far as the timeline, how long do you see this process take? And what would the recommendation be? You made a very valid point as far as being a hostage to a single supply.
Right.
I mean, you are kind of with coal, but you're in transportation too, but not to the degree you would be with gas. Do you advocate federal intervention to
you know, gas was regulated a long time ago. They were probably one of the first people that deregulated, and they kind of forced the electric industry, you know, as far as the people that tried to force that issue. But I don't think we're going back to a regulated market either in electricity or gas in a sense. And, you know, it's going to take a lot of infrastructure to be built in competition among those suppliers and the pipeline companies themselves, which requires probably more pipeline you want to build to your site or any particular site than would typically be, you know, instituted. But it does save a lot of money to do that.
The pipeline folks, as much as we've been with them over the issue of whether or not we should sign firm contracts, to their credit, the pipeline industry's got a pretty good track record of building out the system when they're allowed to. In New England, I think the issue is as much the political opposition, but also the economics that I talked about earlier. So I forget the exact numbers, but if you look at how many miles of new pipe is being built and proposed to be built, it's pretty high. The concern that people should watch out for, though, is that, first of all, permitting is always a problem. So there are some proposals, you mentioned federal intervention, there are some proposals in Congress to speed up the permitting process. FERC, to its credit, does a pretty good job turning around the pipeline applications. But those protesters I mentioned, you know, and protesters, we have a history, you know, hundreds of years of protesters, nothing wrong with protests per se, but literally now every single month at the FERC meetings, so it's gotten to the community level where people are protesting compressor stations, they're protesting expansions of lines, and you might say, well, those are some fringe group folks, and they can, you know, literally get hauled out of the FERC meeting and the rest. But the more serious potential problem lies in whether or not the environmental review of the pipelines will be broadened to include, you know, upstream and downstream impacts of the gas system. So right now, FERC looks at this compressor or this pipeline expansion sort of on an individual basis. And there's some litigation out there saying, no, wait a minute, you can't just look at them individually, it's a cumulative impact. And there's been some litigation, like I said, and it's kind of been going this way to the courts, but what's pending at the Council on Environmental Quality in the White House is this guidance that would essentially tell every federal agency, including FERC, when it comes to gas pipeline permitting, that they have to look at the upstream and downstream impacts. So suddenly you're going to have proceedings before FERC and the court saying, now wait a minute, maybe a compressor station in Indiana to serve a power plant or Ohio, but wait a minute, where did the gas come from that the compressor is going to move? And what would be the environmental impacts of the fracking? And wait a minute, where's this gas going from this compressor? Oh, it's going to a gas-fired power plant. And yes, the gas-fired power plant is, about half the CO2 emissions of coal, but that's still CO2 emissions. So you can see what could potentially happen if that kind of guidance is put forward. It's a huge issue now, and yet to be decided, but it's got major implications. And the last big point is what some people are trying to do, and I alluded to this, is I remember when the fight used to be between the coal folks and when I was in the coal industry and the railroads. Because railroads were always a choke point. They needed coal slurry pipelines, and that didn't quite work out. And then do the coal by wire. Let's build the plants over the coal mines and bypass those barren railroads. Well, same thing sort of happened, not because the pipelines are like the railroads used to be, but you're seeing all these proposals in the Utica and Marcellus to build the gas plants close to the production, bypass interstate pipelines, or at least have more optionality in the gas production supply, build with the newer gas plants from GE and others, really, really low heat rates, and they think they can make, they'll get them for marginal rents, as the economists would say, because they'll get the clearing price in the PJM market, but their costs will be lower because the gas is cheaper, they're right on the Marcellus or Utica, and they've got more efficient units. So that's one way people are trying to get around it, is just kind of bypass the pipelines entirely.
Yeah, the worst thing you can do in these combined cycle coal, whatever, is to announce where you're going to build that power plant too soon. Because, as soon as you do that, all the auction costs for the right-of-ways, for transmission, water pipeline, gas pipeline goes up. And unless you have eminent domain rights, you may spend 5 times more on those assets than you're willing to do. And so that's probably why you're not hearing a lot of announcements, but a lot of work is being done like ducks on a pond. They're paddling very hard underneath the water, but you're not seeing a lot of effort until they get those things identified and basically locked down.
Any other questions?
One little question. You mentioned Reagan. Back in the Reagan era, they had the superconductor. Did that go to the wayside or just get shelled to the battery? What happened to the superconductor? Absolutely terrible story.
Right now it's a bunch of ranch land south of Dallas, because that's where they kind of started that project, and then it moved south, but you never hear about it anymore.
Is it Julie?
Yes.
Julie, are you from Duke?
I am.
You are. She's Mrs. Gaskell at Duke. You got a lot of units under your control, do you not?
Yes.
This may sound like a overly simplified question, but when you're making the dispatch decision in the morning between coal and gas, what have those coal plants been doing all night?
I don't make those decisions, but so I might poke it.
Are those coal plants? Does Duke keep those on simmer?
Simmer? No. We do turn back the units, but also the combined cycles have the flexibility to go to a 1-on-1 and turn down quite a bit as well. So it's a longer look than just a day. I mean, we do a week look ahead and probably even longer than that. But a week look ahead, a day ahead look ahead from a dispatch standpoint.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Because you don't want to flex on coal,
Oh yeah.
So you want to flex on, your gas plants. It's a lot easier. It's so much more flexible. From sharing standpoint as well.
When I've worked with client companies that do repair and maintenance work for coal-fired power plants, they love the ones that cycle.
next one.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Well, we're going to, it's 5 after 12. We've got some, oh, okay, here we go. Why is, all right. Okay, I think I just failed it. All right, so Lopa, you're next. You're up next. Okay. Lopa Parikh is the Director of Federal Regulatory Affairs for the Energy Supply.